All right, class. I know that you were looking at the PowerPoint of the flapper woman and the Victorian woman. And remember, there's a difference in the decade of about 20, or in the time, about 20 to 30 years between this first woman, the Victorian woman, and the flapper woman. And so I want to hear what you've discussed in your Think, Pair, Share groups. What are the differences that you see in these visuals of the Victorian woman and of the flapper woman? D?
Um, we were talking about how the flapper woman seems to not have any shape when the other girl has kind of like an hourglass shape.
Yeah, exactly right.
About.
More of an hourglass. Doesn't that make her look older?
Yeah.
Because you look very womanly when you have the hourglass, right? But then when someone doesn't have shape, they tend to look more like a man, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, Sarah, why do you think why were they trying to look like men? Why would you think that? Or boys?
Maybe they just wanted to change with the way people saw them to be different.
Yeah, totally. And so, it's crazy just in a few decades. Dee, do you remember what a decade is? We talked about this. What is it? What's the definition of a decade?
It's a time period.
Of how many years?
10?
Yeah, so whenever I say decade, remember each decade is 10 years. So about 2 to 3 decades, how many years would that be about?
20, 30?
Yeah, 20 to 30, exactly. So from about 20 to 30 years, women went from wanting to look very womanly and feminine to boyish and young. And what else did you notice, Dee, looking at the picture of the women, comparing them?
Also, we talked about how one girl's wearing a dress all the way to the floor, and the other girl's showing her legs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's kind of rebellious, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so the women of the flapper era, of the 20s, they were trying to make a stance, and they were trying to send a certain message. Today, what we're going to talk about is how women and why women changed from being very womanly and proper and modest. A Victorian woman, she was very proper. She had good manners. She cared about the home. She wanted to be a good mother. All of her focus was how to be a good mother and wife, and how to look like a good woman. Whereas the 20s, the flappers, they completely changed, and they were all about pleasing themselves and doing whatever they want to do. Today we're going to talk about that. So let's go to the next slide. And so here we have on this slideshow a picture of a house. And that's because, as I was saying, Victorian women, they cared about the home. Their focus was completely on the home. But there was a thing called the Industrial Revolution. Do you remember, Dee, what happened in the Industrial Revolution? Can you remind us? Do you remember?
Was it when there was a lot of new inventions?
Mm-hmm.
And people were coming up with new ideas on how to do things better?
Totally, exactly. So people had new ideas, there were new inventions, and because of this, people started factories because they wanted to make all of the new inventions that they'd make. So because of the factories, many, many new jobs were created. And so remember, when you picture like a mom and a dad in the olden days, don't you normally picture like a farmer? He's working on the home, and he's bringing things to the home for the woman to refine. She takes the milk and she turns it to butter, or she takes the wool and she spins it to fabric. So the woman was the refiner of the home. But now that jobs were created, people were moving from outside of the city to the city to get jobs. And as this started, the men were going and making money. They weren't bringing home anything for them to refine. So the women needed a new job. So soon, their focus turned from the home, why don't you go to the next slide? Right there, next slide, to society. And so these Victorian women, like I was saying, they cared about the home. They wanted to protect the virtue of the home and their family. But now, as women, they didn't have anything to refine. And as their men were going out and getting jobs, they needed something to do. So what they did with their time is they turned to politics, they turned to economics, they turned to caring and bringing virtue from inside of just the home, but to all of society. And so today we're going to talk about a few, an organization and a woman, one woman of the progressive era. That's what this time period is called, the progressive era. Why don't you write this down, class? The progressives, this is the time after the Victorian age of people who wanted to bring virtue to the world and make it a better place. And so we're going to talk about, why don't we go to the next slide? This first woman, her name is Jane Addams. And I know you did some reading last night to prepare yourselves to for this presentation. Do any of you remember very much about Jane Addams? Brian, do you at all?
I remember that she was kind of the woman in charge of all the other women that were changing.
Good answer, Brian. So yeah, she was actually a very important womanly figure in history, and she is an example of a progressive woman who she went out and she got an education. She graduated from college. And she went to lots of school, which is very unusual for women at this time. Not many of them went to school. And she realized that there was a problem in society. And she saw that there were a lot of poor people. And so she realized that she wanted to fix society and help the poor people. And so what she did is she created the whole house. Does anyone remember that? Raise your hand if you remember that word from the reading. Yes, the whole house, exactly. And that is a home that was created in neighborhoods that anybody who didn't have a place to live, who didn't have food, they could go to and get these things. And she taught classes. She taught art classes, education classes. Do you have a question?
Yeah, was that house only for girls?
No, that is a great question. This house was for anyone in society who needed it. She was there. She created these to refine and help society. She didn't want poor people to sit there and remain uneducated and not have a place to stay, to not have food to eat. And so how is Jane Addams, from what I talked about, what a progressive woman is and what a Victorian woman is, how is Jane Addams an example of a progressive woman? Braden?
I think that you said that before the girls wanted to stay at home.
Exactly. So they were in the home and they cared about the virtue of the home, right?
Yeah. And this lady, she's out doing things and she's teaching other people and trying to get people to do things kind of outside the home.
Mm-hmm. So she changed. Instead of focusing on the home, she focused on improving and bringing virtue to society, to everyone. What does that mean when I say society, Braden?
Just all the people.
Yeah,
that
everyone. She wasn't just focusing on her family, but everyone. Great, thank you. And who can tell me why did the women change from focusing in the home to that of society? Who can remind me of that? Do you remember, Bryce?
You said that because everyone was moving to the city, that there was more things happening, and because they didn't have the milk or stuff to do.
Mm-hmm. They didn't have anything to refine in the home. Mm-hmm.
And so they found other things to do, like help the people.
Exactly. So, I mean, when we think of feminists today, we often think of women who are trying to masculinize themselves. They're trying to get jobs and they're trying to have the opportunities as men. While that is the definition of feminism today, the definition of feminism back then were women trying to almost make society more womanly. They were trying to bring virtue and bring goodness to society. So, can you tell me, can you repeat what I just said, Dave? What were these women trying to do?
They're trying to make everyone else be more woman-like.
Yeah, isn't that interesting?
Yeah. What does that mean? Woman.
So womanly or feminine, they were, so the key word that the progressives used was virtue. And often when you think the woman, the Victorian woman, they were very virtuous. And now once the Victorian woman became progressive and turned to all of society, they tried to bring virtue to everyone. So and they wanted everyone to, you know, have hygiene, to have food, to have an education, to make good choices regarding like sexual decisions and without alcohol. And that's actually our next slide. Let's go to the next slide. So another example of progressive woman is the WTCU. And that, if you remember from the reading, that stands for Women's Christian Temperance Union. And these women, what they wanted to do is they were against alcohol. And that's what we call prohibition. And does anyone remember why they were against alcohol? Or why do you think women of this time were against alcohol? Paul?
Because it's bad for you.
Well, yes, it's bad for you. Why else do you think?
Maybe they wanted to make people do better things, and alcohol makes you do bad things.
Yeah, so remember that men of this time, they started working in the factories, and often a lot of these men started drinking, or if they weren't, a lot of men already drank. But most of the problems in the home were centered around drinking, you know, abuse of the wives, or wasting money, or men leaving women. It usually all was around alcohol. And so what these women realized is like, let's make society better, and let's take alcohol out of it, and that will improve society. So they started this union, they called it the Women's Temperance Christian Union, of taking alcohol out of society. And Dee, can you read what the sign says on the slide? What does that say?
Lips that touch liquor shall not touch ours.
So what does that mean?
They won't kiss guys that drink liquor.
Exactly. And why do you think that's a powerful way for the women to argue against alcohol?
Because the guys want to kiss the girls.
Right, right. So, I mean, these women, even though before women had you have to remember these women at this time, they can't vote, they can't run for office, they have virtually no rights. They are using the few things they have, such as control over husbands or boyfriends, to bring forth political action. And in this case, it's called prohibition. Do you remember, Bryce, do you remember what prohibition means?
I forgot.
You forgot. It means they're against drinking. It's being against alcohol and making it illegal. So, now just to finish up before this lesson is over, I know that we started off with a think, pair, share. We're going to end with a write, pair, share. And I want you to look over the questions that we started at the beginning. How did the women, the Victorian women, change to become progressive women? What caused them to do that, and what were their goals? So why don't you take a minute and you write, and I'm going to walk around and I'm going to see what you're writing and have some discussions with you, okay? So, David, what are you writing about?
I'm writing about how the girls are now going to do things in the city with the people, and they're going to try to get people to stop drinking.
Great. And why did they want people to stop drinking?
Because they wanted to make them more like the women were good.
Exactly. Great. Keep writing and make sure you write full sentences. Okay. All right, class. Great. Just to end, I want you all to share with me some of the things that you wrote. How did the Victorian women change to the progressive women? job, guys.